The intelligence report, which was published in February, describes it as disjointed and ad hoc quality. The whole enterprise was ad hoc quality.
Whose intelligence report was that?
This is the intelligence report of the United States. Intelligence report was published in February. Let me just quote what it says here.
Was this an NIC estimate from what was getting right?
It says here, the absence of well-defined doctrine on an effectively coordinated strategy caused the CPA's approach to reconstruction to have a disjointed and ad hoc quality.
That's, I mean, it's a big question to go into the whole of the CPA's capability.
I'm talking about when you were there. Is that how you would describe it?
Yes, I'm happy with that description. The whole American effort between the civilian and the military aspects was compartmentalized, stovepiped is the word that is often used, including amongst Americans. The military and civilian arms were not working smoothly together. There were differences of view within the military. There were differences of view between the Pentagon and the State Department. And these were all being played out as we were trying to administer a country. There were also differences of view from time to time between London and Washington that come into the records of the conversations between London and Washington.
Can we now move on? Because we touched earlier about the relationship between the CPA in Baghdad and Basra. How did that work in practice during your time?
The southeast in the arrangements for Iraq was regarded both by London and by Washington as very much a British concern. To the extent that very little American money was going into MND Southeast and the Basra area, which led to the British deciding that quite early on that they had to bring in British money through DFID, British support for the military, to create almost an independent sub-administration in that part of Iraq. I inherited that situation when I arrived. I went down very early on to see my counterpart in Basra, Sir Hilary Sinnott, who was deputy administrator to Bremer and was in the CPA command.
We heard from him last week, yes.
And so I left him most of the time to get on with his own operation, to report independently to London, to look for resources independently from London, and to report to Bremer. But we saw each other's telegrams, we talked when necessary, when we could help each other, and I supported him with Bremer when he wanted that, and I supported him with London less often when he needed that, but on occasions he did need to make an impact on London because he didn't have enough resources. But on the whole, I think you should take my answer to indicate that we worked fairly separately and we didn't have daily contact on what was going on, from my point of view in Basra, from his point of view in the rest of Iraq.
So in other words, you exerted no influence on what happened to CPA South?
No, any influence I exerted over what was going on in the southeast would have been done through the CPA system as a whole, or in response to a particular question from the southeast or from London.
Okay.
Can I just interrupt? There was reference a few moments ago by Baroness Brashar to an intelligence report in the public domain. What in fact it was a published report by the Special Inspector General for Reconstruction, which was published under congressional authority. It wasn't, as it were, an intelligence estimate. Thank you.
My other question really is about de-Baathification, because when we saw Sir John Sawyers, he said that the coalition went a step further than was necessary on de-Baathification. But it would be a mistake to think that de-Baathification as a policy was not necessary. Is that your assessment of the impact of de-Baathification?
The de-Baathification decree was issued way before I got there, within 4 days of Ambassador Bremer arriving. So I when I arrived, met the consequences of that. And I wouldn't disagree from what John Sawyers told you earlier, that this was, on balance, an understandable decision, that the Shia politicians in particular were strongly against bringing ex-Baathists, particularly senior Baathists, into the new administration, into the governing council or whatever, and that Ambassador Bremer made quite a careful judgment of how far he could go with de-Baathification. What did not happen was to find people to run a government who were not Baathists. And that decree was issued before a clear route had been found to filling the posts necessary for the minimal government of Iraq. So there was an error not so much in the de-Baathification decree, or even, if I could add, the decree disbanding the Iraqi army. There was a failure to fill the gaps which those institutions performed in Iraq through any other means, which should have made them think about the wisdom of those two decrees, or the timing of them. On de-Baathification, when I arrived, Ambassador Bremer was handing over the implementation of that decree to an Iraqi committee under Ahmed Chalabi, who was deeply anti-Baathist. And in my view, de-Baathification in practice was taken too far for the sensible administration of Iraq, including in the professions, in the academic and legal and other professions, and in the civil service, when we needed Iraq's middle class to be performing its function if we were to administer it properly. And we all tried to persuade both Ambassador Bremer and Mr. Chalabi to allow more Baathists back in practice if they were not senior Baathists who'd taken responsibility for some of the awful things that happened under Saddam Hussein. And to some extent, Ambassador Bremer mitigated the effects of his decree through the implementation of it.
Now, UK were obviously sending some secondees, and were these secondees having an impact at the operational level, if not at the strategic level?
The UK secondees?
Yes.
Yes, they were performing extremely effectively under very trying circumstances.
I mean, how were they interacting within the CPA? I mean, they were very effective. What areas were they concentrating on?
On the whole, any other nationality than American in the CPA was regarded as completely integrated into the CPA process. So that the two younger officers we had in the governance section on the political process, one of them a very good Arabic speaker, the only good Arabic speaker in the governance section, Irfan Sadiq, and his colleague Julie Chappell were both very effective younger members of the governance team. Andy Bearpark was a deputy administrator or a director for operations under Ambassador Bremer, hugely effective, trusted by Bremer, regarded with great respect by Bremer. There were many other Britons working in the CPA who did their job well and got the respect of the Americans for the job that they were doing. If somebody did not fit, as one or two didn't, they were asked to move on, but on the whole that was only a tiny proportion of our 100 or so people operating there.
Okay.